I would say that hands down, the greatest lesson that I have learned over the last year and a half of decluttering our house is that I just need just what I need. And I never really realized how big of an impact having less could have on our home. But that's not the only lesson that I learned. Today, I want to share with you just how I decluttered about 80% of our belongings out of our house, what I learned, and what I wouldn't do again if I had to do it all over again. Well, hello friend, I'm Mary Beth with At What Cost, where we are learning to apply God's truths to our everyday lives. And the best way that our family has learned to do that is by embracing a more minimalistic lifestyle. So here at this channel, I want to spend some time helping you learn how to simplify your life, declutter your home, and free up space for you really to explore your faith and what you believe. And then on Sundays, we have a Bible study tip or topic to really help deepen that faith. This video is part of the Mega March Motivation collaboration that Dawn from The Minimal Mom has put together. And you will likely recognize some of the same YouTubers that got together in January for the Clutter-Free January Challenge. It was a lot of fun, and I know you have probably already enjoyed the playlist so far. And if you have not yet explored the playlist, I would encourage you to check out the other creators because there is some amazing content here. Now, I recently polled my subscribers here at What Cost and asked the question, which area of your home needs the most attention? And one of the responses that I got just kind of had me just a little tickled from the Beachy Farmhouse. She said, by living spaces, I hope you mean the entire house because it all needs attention. And if there were ever a comment I could relate to, it is that. So let's dive in today to our whole house decluttering because let's face it, she's not the only one who feels like our entire house needs a good decluttering. So when I tell people that I have decluttered almost 80% of our home, and that included 2 storage units, one that was a 10 by 10, another that was a 10 by 20, and most of the inside of our home. Now, I still have not tackled the garage, but that's a video for a different day. The first question that usually comes up when they hear that 80% of our belongings went out the door is, where do I even start? Well, for me, it was quite literally kids' clothes. I was in the midst of a total laundry breakdown. I had just way too much, and I happened to be looking for an organizational system, and I discovered a laundry video from Dawn at The Minimal Mom that completely and utterly changed the course of our journey here to family minimalism. When I really thought about the amount of time that I was spending folding laundry and putting laundry away, only to discover that 3 more loads had fallen in its place, I realized that so much of my time had been lost doing laundry, that there were time suckers happening in our home that I just couldn't get past to do the next thing to get our house back under control. So reducing the amount of kids' clothes that we had really reduced the amount of laundry that we had and opened up some more time for me to actually declutter other areas of our home. Now, the next time sucker that I really needed to deal with was toys. We had some serious issues getting toys cleaned up in our home, and I'm sure you probably can relate to this if you have young children at home. I quarantined as much of their toys as I could, especially the ones that I knew they just were not playing with. So I quarantined all of those, and I only left what I was willing to clean up. Because after all, if I want them to clean up to my standard, I may just have to end up being the one cleaning it up. And of course, we teach our kids to be responsible. We encourage them to take care of their items and to clean up when they're done. But let's face it, they can get overwhelmed with their stuff just like we can. And I'll tell you, on the other side of 80%, they clean up a whole lot easier than they used to. The last big time sucker that I had in our home was my kitchen. So this would not just take up my time, but it would just totally derail my day. So the kitchen is just about the first place I go in our house after I have gotten up and gotten ready for the day. Coming down the stairs, ready to do Bible study, to really get my day started, I would be faced with piles after piles of dishes from the night before, or maybe the night before that. You know how it goes. I just had more than what I could manage, which meant all of the time that I would typically use to help get my mind ready for the day was being sucked up again with more and more stuff. My day would not be off to a good start, which meant my mood would not be off to a good start. And so by the end of the evening, I had just felt like almost my entire day was just a wash. And I would finish the day just as exhausted as I had started it. So really doing a good hard decluttering in our kitchen freed up some of that time, and it did a few other things as well. Now, unfortunately, I don't have any video of those big topics that I initially started with because, quite frankly, at that time, I didn't anticipate actually having a YouTube community or Facebook group, an Instagram page, or a blog. This is totally a shameless plug, by the way. So if you have not subscribed, I'm going to ask you to do that because, this is just the part of the video that we're in. I'm just saying what I'm saying. Hit the subscribe button. If you're enjoying this, I'd love for you to hit the like button too. But I didn't anticipate actually having this whole community around decluttering our house. And I am just so incredibly glad that I didn't have to go this alone, and you don't either. So what happened next? Well, now that all of my time suckers were out of the way, it really freed up the time and the space and the mental energy to be able to declutter other areas of our home. And because I started with some of the things that didn't have a hugely sentimental value, or I just was kind of frustrated and could pass along easily, I got a few really good wins under my belt, which gave me the confidence to keep going. But there is more to the why I chose to declutter that we're going to talk about in just a little bit. I also told you in the beginning that we were going to talk about some reasons that I wouldn't necessarily declutter in this same way again. But before we get to that, I want to answer the second question that I usually get after, where do you start? And that is, when do you actually find time to declutter? So, a few things that you should know about me. I work a full-time 40-plus hour week for an employer that is not myself. I have 3 very active boys, a husband, a house to manage, and I teach a women's Bible study, and of course, I have a YouTube channel. So, to say that time feels a little precious most of the time is an understatement. What that really meant was that I had to be very driven, very persistent, and I had to be flexible in the way that I was going to declutter our home. If I wanted to get our house under control, I was going to have to be ruthless and I was going to have to be persistent. And inevitably, when we start talking about time and when we actually take time to declutter, the other question of, but how do you find time to have quality time with your family while you're decluttering the house? And this is where we have to have some really honest but hard conversation. The hard answer in this is that you can only be in one place at one time. We aren't really able to multitask as well as we might think we can. If you are in the early stages of decluttering your home and you have a lot of work to do, you may have to devote more time to decluttering some days than quality time with your family. But remember, this is a season and it doesn't have to last long if we are serious in our initial effort to reduce the number of things we have in our home. It is also one thing that can happen on our own timeline. I didn't have 40 hours a week to devote to decluttering. If I added up the hours I spent purging our house, the hours I spent with my family and just maintaining an area that I had decluttered far outweighed the time I spent going through the items in our home. I could choose when I was going to declutter and how far I wanted to go in that particular session. And I don't spend nearly as much time these days decluttering as I did in the initial big purge of our home. Now, don't get me wrong, it did take time, balancing my time between family and decluttering, and for me, it meant that sometimes on the weekends I would declutter on a Saturday and miss out on some of the fun time when my husband would take our kids to the park or out for lunch and give me just a little bit of uninterrupted time in our home to declutter. I also used a little bit of vacation time. I did decluttering in the morning before my kids got up. I decluttered in the evening time after they went to bed. We had to read one book instead of 5 books before bed. We had to have frozen pizza instead of gourmet meals. And if I'm perfectly honest, even the time that I was spending with my kids before I actively decluttered our home, it really wasn't quality. I was anxious about everything in our house. I worried every time somebody came over that they were going to miss a turn to get to the restroom and end up in my guest bedroom that was overflowing with all manner of clutter. And I really wasn't the best version of myself that I possibly could have been in those times. So decluttering, while it took time away from my family and it had me work just a little bit harder than I wanted to most days, the payoff in the end was so big that it was really worth all of the time that I spent decluttering, so that now I have all of the time with my family that I really desire. Now, at the beginning of this video, I did mention that we were going to talk about the ways that I wouldn't declutter if I had to go back and do it again. And we are going to do that in just a moment, so hang in there with me just a little longer. Next week, we are going to talk about all of the ways that I would do this again and what has contributed to having a very, relatively organized home. And so that is week 2 in this collaboration. So now I want to talk about what I wouldn't do if I had to do this all over again, and some of the reasons that decluttering and pursuing family minimalism really became top priority in our home. So the number one thing that I would not do again if I had a whole house declutter like I did 80% of our belongings ago is the Rage Purge. The process for decluttering my home really kind of went the same way every time. I would get fed up with the space. I would go all in and just absolutely be ruthless, purge as much as I possibly could, and take all of the things that didn't belong in that room out, reorganize them into some of the bins that they had been in, or return them back to the space where they actually went. Unfortunately, they didn't have a home once they got there. And so I would have messes kind of all over the house. I would just be shuffling some of the clutter from room to room as I went through each area of our home and decluttered all the things that I really wanted to declutter. Now, was it effective? Yes, of course, I got 80% of our belongings out of our home. Did I have a little bit less struggle getting rid of things because I was so frustrated with said things that I just wanted them out of our house? Yes. Yes, it was. Did it get incredibly overwhelming to shuffle totes and move messes as I continually decluttered our home room by room? Yeah, it totally did. It became very overwhelming, and while I got the job done, I wouldn't say it was the best way to go. So, although it worked, I wouldn't use it as an exclusive method for decluttering. I much prefer more of the onion method, or the method that you'll hear about from both Dawn and Dana K. White at A Slob Comes Clean. Cass from Clutterbug has been talking about it with their course, Take Your House Back. And having this process of going and handling each item as I take it, deciding what to do with it right then, and not accumulating the mess behind me, I really feel like has been a much better method for me now on the other side of the initial decluttering. Which leads me to the next thing that I absolutely would not do again if I needed to do another big whole house decluttering or just starting out, and that is tote shuffling. I would not have anything left over when I am finished in a room that I have not fully dealt with. Because of the nature of our clutter, just, swiping the items into a bin, putting a lid on it, and throwing it in a room, I had things in rooms that they just had no business being in. Things that should be in our dining room were in the guest room. Things that should be in the kitchen were in the guest room. A lot of things ended up in the guest room. Thankfully, now we have a lot more room for guests, but initially it was just storage room G. So all of those things just kept floating around, and I ended up moving mess to different mess to different mess, and it just ended up being this chain reaction of hot mess to hot mess to hot mess. And it perpetuated the cycle of my rage purges. So I would get fed up with the mess, I would go into that room and I would declutter, reduce down the mess again, move it to another area. I'd get fed up with that area and I would reduce it down again. And eventually I did end up with less stuff because each time I did it, I had less and less to go through. But I also got to the other side of decluttering and couldn't quite figure out if I had missed something or was I really done. It was hard to get out of that groove of feeling like I always needed to be getting rid of some mess. Now, I don't want to talk too much about what I would do again, because again, that is for next week. But I do want to share something that made dealing with the rage purging and the tote shuffling just a little bit easier and kept me going as I moved through this whole house decluttering process. The real saving grace through all of this was that I had a deep desire to change the way we lived. I had been fed up and I had a lot of emotion driving behind my decluttering. It really became like an unstoppable force to get all of the excess out of our house. It also opened me up to hearing some of the things that I had heard before from our Bible studies, Sunday school classes, or even in a sermon in just a little bit different light. So as my faith began to take on this kind of fresh new way of feeling like I could connect with the Lord by having less to manage, from a practical standpoint, I did more Bible study when I walked downstairs to a clean kitchen because I didn't sit and worry about the dishes that were piled up and whether or not the kids were going to have snack because I hadn't been to the grocery store, and the chain reaction of negative thoughts that used to disrupt that time for me to connect with the Lord. So although keeping all of this stuff came at a cost, I really was able to harness that emotion of being frustrated and disappointed and confused and angry about all of the things we had in our house to really help keep driving me toward the end goal of having less. And as my time started to be freed up, as my attachment to things started lessening, I had more and more time to devote to developing my faith. So if that sounds like a journey that you would like to be on, I would love to encourage you again to subscribe to the channel and check out the other creators in this Mega March Motivation playlist. And I just know that you're going to find some really good tidbits of information. So you can find me here every Friday with a family minimalism video and every Sunday with a Bible study tip. If you'd like to check out the playlist from January, you can click the link right here. And if you'd like to see the next video here on our channel, you can click the link down here. And don't forget, subscription button right over here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Now, go get rid of some stuff. Go do it now. Seriously, I'll wait.